Welcome to our video lecture on topic B3.2, transport. We're going to focus just on animal physiology transport today. We'll save transport in plants for our unit on botany. Our guiding questions: what adaptations facilitate transport of fluids in animals and plants, but not plants, not today. What are the differences and similarities between transport in animals and plants? Again, not today. Our objectives: we're going to talk about different types of blood vessels. We're going to describe the functions and adaptations of those different types. We'll outline how to measure pulse. We'll describe consequences of occlusions of arteries. We'll also talk about what even are occlusions. We'll compare and contrast those different types of blood vessels to sum everything up at the end of this video. So there's different types of blood vessels. There are three that we're going to talk about: arteries, veins, and capillaries. What's nice about arteries? Starts with the letter A, and they carry blood away from the heart. Those arteries will carry blood away from the heart. Arteries branch into tiny little baby arteries called arterioles. Those arterioles branch a little bit more into some capillaries. Those capillaries are so tiny. Just one blood cell at a time can pass through these guys. Those capillaries will then start to merge together into bigger vessels. Those bigger vessels eventually become baby veins called venules. Those venules will merge into giant veins, and those veins are going to carry blood back into the heart. Again, we've got our heart here. Arteries are going to carry blood away. We've got the capillaries connect to the veins. Veins carry that blood back up to the heart. Here we have a lovely micrograph kind of showing the different kinds of vessels. We've got arteries here. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but notice that the inside, the lumen of the artery, is not giant, but the thickness of this muscle and connective tissue around the artery is so giant. This is what opposite for the vein. So the vein has a lot of floppy space on the inside, so its lumen is larger than the artery's lumen, but the muscle and the connective tissue is not quite as thick. We're going to focus on extra details about capillaries first. So remember that arteries carry blood away from the heart. Those get branched into arterioles. Those get further branched into lots of capillaries. Capillaries are highly branched, lots and lots of surface area for lots and lots of material exchange. Material exchange is the function of these capillaries. Another adaptation that allows capillaries to do this job of material exchange very well: they have a very narrow lumen. That means that only one blood cell can get through at a time. There's also a fair amount of pressure toward the beginning of the capillary bed, the side that's closer to the arteries, and that's going to cause plasma, the watery part of blood. That plasma is going to ooze out of the capillary and then into the tissue that surrounds these capillary beds. Lots of super cool nutrients dissolved in that plasma, that tissue fluid: oxygen gas and glucose molecules, some ions like sodium and potassium, all things that the cells need. Remember that diffusion is all about that concentration gradient. So if I have a high concentration of oxygen in the blood and a lower concentration of oxygen in the tissues, then concentration gradient will allow that oxygen to diffuse from high concentration to low concentration. No energy needed, no ATP. It just happens. Also in the cells, we've got a lot of CO2 that's been building up from cellular respiration. That high concentration of carbon dioxide is going to result in the diffusion of carbon dioxide back into the blood, and then the blood will carry it away from the tissues and back to the heart so that that CO2 can be disposed of. Different tissues have different amounts of capillaries. Some tissues are highly vascular. Highly vascular tissues would include things like the liver and the kidneys. Muscle, the lungs, have lots and lots of capillaries. Some things are poorly vascular, like skin, epithelial tissue. Cartilage is not super ooh, I may have spelled that wrong. Cartilage. That looks weird. Cartilage is not well vascularized. We also have the cornea of the eye. The cornea of the eye is that colorless flap that's kind of right in front of the colored part of our eyeball. So this here is the cornea. Light goes through it, through the pupil of the eye, hits the retina. We don't want a bunch of blood vessels blocking the light coming through. So the cornea of the eye is avascular, no capillaries at all. The lens also poorly vascularized. Some of our capillaries are extra porous to allow for lots of stuff to flow out. We call the pores of these more fenestrated capillaries, fenestrations. Fenestration comes from the Latin word for window. So they've got these openings, these windows in them, these fenestrations that just allow for even more permeability. More substances can flow in and out, a better material exchange. Capillaries receive their blood from arteries. We mentioned these arteries a couple slides ago. Arteries look like this. They have a smaller lumen than veins, definitely bigger lumens than the capillaries, but smaller than the veins. They have a much thicker muscular wall. They also have this super thick layer of stretchy tissue that's formed up of two kinds of proteins called elastin and collagen. This allows the arteries to kind of stretch, but then bounce back. So when blood gets pumped out of the heart into the arteries, it causes the arteries to bulge. That high pressure pushes on the walls of the arteries, but the muscle, and this muscle is what we call smooth muscle. It's not like muscles in our arms that I use when I think about bending my arm or writing things, but instead this is autonomic or unconscious control muscle. And so our bodies, we'll talk about the medulla of our brain, just helps to kind of control the contraction of the muscle of the arteries so that it pushes back on that high blood pressure. That allows us to keep a high pressure in the arteries all the time, which causes the blood to continue flowing away from the heart. So we've got this high pressure from that narrower lumen and that super strong muscle, and that elastin and collagen keeps that blood flowing away from the heart. We're going away from, whoa, that's supposed to be a heart. We're going away from the heart. We can actually feel that stretching and then bounce back of our arteries due to heart rate, and we call that our pulse. So we can actually measure our heart rate by palpating our pulse. That just means we're gonna like feel it. We've got a couple different kinds of arteries that we can find. So we can look for our radial artery that's in our wrist. We can find the carotid artery that's in our necks. Do be careful. Don't push on your carotid too hard because that might, reduce the amount of blood flow to your brain. That's not good. So just a gentle palpation, a gentle feel to find that pulse. And you can literally feel those arteries ups and downs. We usually count how many times we can feel the pulse for 10 or 15 seconds and then multiply up to get beats per minute. We can also measure blood pressure using this amazing device that I always pronounce incorrectly. It is a sphygmomanometer. I usually throw an extra syllable in there. We can also call it a blood pressure monitor, and that's fine. How this guy works is pretty cool. So we're going to use this bulb. We're going to pump up the air in this cuff. That's actually going to put so much pressure on the blood vessels that blood cannot flow through the artery anymore. So we have squeezed those blood vessels closed. We don't want to leave that on for very long. That would cause some damage to the tissues. So what we do is we release the pressure just a little bit, and that causes the pressure of the valve to lessen, and at some point it'll be lessened enough that the blood can start to flow through the artery again. The machine or the person with the stethoscope listening can now detect the pulse, and so whatever the pressure is on the machine, when we can start to hear or feel that pulse again, is what we call the systole, systolic pressure, and that's from that pushing out on the walls of the arteries. We continue to release the pressure of the cuff until at some point it's not pushing on it enough for us to even notice or feel or detect or hear the pulse anymore, and that is what we call the diastole, or the diastolic pressure. So this is one super cool way for us to measure blood pressure. Back to our different types of blood vessels, we're going to chat here about our veins, that third type of blood vessel. Veins are going to collect blood at low pressure from the capillaries and then return it back to the heart. Veins have much wider lumens than do our arteries. That's going to allow that low pressure to be maintained. They have thinner muscular walls. They have thinner elastin and collagen tissue, which makes them a little bit floppy. But in a way that's kind of good because that allows our skeletal muscles, the muscles that we use when we work out, our calf muscles, our thigh muscles, our biceps and triceps, it allows those muscles, our skeletal muscles, to squeeze on those super floppy veins. When we work out, not only are we doing good things for those muscles, we're building up that muscle, but we're also helping to push blood back to the heart. So here our muscles are relaxed. We've got this blood sitting in our vein. When we work out, when we contract those muscles, it actually pushes the blood forward and back toward the heart. This is what we want. This is really good. So working out, again, good for your muscles and also good for your vascular system. Veins also have these super cool things called valves. Valves open and close at different pressures. These guys help to prevent backflow. So when we push the blood up, oh, that's a really bad color. So when that blood is getting pushed up, that valve will open, the blood can flow through. When we stop pushing on our muscles, that blood gravity, if we're talking about the leg, gravity might try to pull that blood back down. That valve will close just like that, and then blood cannot go that way at all. It gets trapped in the valve until that next muscle contraction pushes that blood up and back to the heart. Working out is good for our blood vessels. As we mentioned a moment ago, a good diet is also really beneficial for the health of our vascular system. So we're going to talk here about occlusion of arteries. Occlusions are formed from a buildup of plaque. So we have this plaque that builds up sometimes on the insides of our arteries. This can come from a poor diet. So if we have too many trans fats or saturated fatty acids in our diet, we have too much cholesterol. If we are smokers, we're at a higher risk of this plaque buildup. If sometimes we just get unlucky with our genetics, and so we're at a higher risk for this happening. These buildups of plaques are known as occlusions. We can also call it another word that I pronounce very poorly, atherosclerosis. Again, sorry for that pronunciation. This is a hardening of the arteries, buildup of the plaque inside the arteries. Arteries already have a slightly narrower lumen, but now it's a narrower. This is going to cause the pressure inside the artery to build up even higher than normal. We can also have this be so bad that it completely blocks off the artery. Sometimes blood clots can form in there, and then blood cannot flow through this artery anymore. If this happens in the heart, we're talking about a heart attack. So this is really bad. In the heart, we have this main artery that takes blood away from the heart, lots of lovely oxygen-rich, glucose-rich blood flowing through the aorta. The aorta is the main artery of the whole entire body. Right as the aorta is leaving the heart, there are these tiny little branches. These branches are what we call coronary arteries. These coronary arteries are going to actually feed the cells of the heart. The heart is muscle. It's made up of cells. Its cells have lots of mitochondria that need lots of glucose and oxygen in order to make lots of ATP so that they can contract that heart all day long and all night long. So if we have one of these occlusions, if we have a blockage of one of these coronary arteries, now blood cannot get to the cells of the muscle of the heart, which means that no ATP is going to get made, which means that that heart cannot beat anymore. And this is a heart attack, which is really bad. So take care of your blood vessels, take care of your heart. We're going to wrap up here with a quick compare and contrast of all these different kinds of blood vessels. So we're going to review capillaries and arteries and veins in this lovely Venn diagram. All of them are composed of cells. Woo, cells. All of them are going to transport blood. All of them transport blood in one direction. So this is a closed circuit. We've got blood that flows to the heart, away from the heart, back to the heart, away from the heart, back to the heart. Arteries and veins both have some muscle and some elastin and some collagen tissue. The arteries have very thick muscle, elastin, collagen, whereas the veins have thinner muscle and elastin and collagen. That thick muscle is going to allow those arteries to maintain a high pressure as it takes blood away from the heart. And remember that the artery's lumen can actually change size. So it can expand and then contract. So we have walls that can change size. We call that our pulse. The veins don't do that. The veins are super floppy because they have that thinner muscle and elastin and collagen wall. But that floppiness allows them to be constricted by skeletal muscle. When we work out, our muscles squeeze on those veins to help the veins take the blood at low pressure back to the heart. And veins also have those super cool valves to prevent backflow of the blood because we want that blood moving always in one direction. Capillaries are super, super thin walled to allow for lots of material exchange. That's their job. They connect the arteries and veins in those capillary beds. Some of our capillaries have some super cool fenestrations that increase the permeability so that diffusion of the materials can happen even more easily. And my friends, that's all we've got. Great work today. As we have wrapped up all these objectives, we talked about those different types of blood vessels. We've got arteries, we've got veins, we've got capillaries. We talked about some of the functions and adaptations of all those different types of blood vessels. We talked about how to measure our pulse. We can use the radial artery or the carotid artery. Carotid artery in your neck. Be gentle with your brain. We talked about some of the consequences of occlusions or blockages of those arteries. And then we did our lovely Venn diagram. Great work.